All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you all out to our press conference this morning. The Nebraska Association of County Officials and the Nebraska League of Municipalities, along with many other entities, have been working together with Governor Pillen, his key staff, and members of the legislature to review Nebraska tax policy and to craft recommendations to reduce the property tax burden on our fellow Nebraskans, while providing for the revenue needed for Nebraska county and local government to provide essential services to our citizens. My name is Mark Shanerock, and I am a Jefferson County Commissioner, and I also serve as the Southeast Area Director of the Nebraska Association of County Officials. County and local government is the level of government closest to our citizens. And as you will see in the survey results that we are presenting today, it is the most trusted by our citizens. And they value this at a very high level, those services which are provided by local government. Services such as infrastructure maintenance, roads, bridges, and other infrastructure, emergency services such as law enforcement, fire service, ambulance service, and other critical services provided by local government. These are all highly valued by our fellow Nebraskans. After serving our country as an officer of the United States Army for a long career, I returned home to Nebraska and became a Jefferson County Commissioner, now going on my 9th year. I was elected to serve as the Southeast Director of the Nebraska Association of County Officials, representing 17 counties of Southeast Nebraska. In all my service, I've always tried to do the right thing to best serve our citizens that we as elected officials represent and to serve liberty and freedom. That is a sacred trust. The county elected officials with whom I serve from across Nebraska, our legislature, and our state leaders all share that trust. We are committed to work with Governor Pillen and the legislature to accomplish the objectives of tax reform for all Nebraskans and to ensure that our local and county governments will continue to have the revenue needed to provide essential services to our fellow citizens. Thank you, and I'm now going to turn the podium over for further details of our press conference this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Deb Van Meter. I'm the mayor of Gibbon and president of the League of Nebraska Municipalities. It is important to emphasize that the League Executive Board and NACO Board of Directors support the governor's overall objective to provide property tax relief with the use of state sources of revenue. However, the League Board and NACO Board defer to the governor and the legislature to determine which state sources of revenue should be used to provide additional property tax relief to Nebraskans. The statewide poll commissioned by the League and NACO underscores the need for more property tax relief. The poll also indicates that an overwhelming number of Nebraska voters across the political spectrum support using various state sources of revenue to provide additional property tax relief and help local governments maintain essential services. Having served as a local elected official for over 23 years, I was not surprised by the extremely high percentage of Nebraska voters who regard as important our municipal and county investments in infrastructure, emergency services, public safety services, as well as our libraries, parks, and recreation centers. As I previously stated, the League and NACO both support the governor's overall objective to provide additional property tax relief to Nebraskans. However, it is important to recognize the significant tax relief efforts achieved last year by the legislature under the leadership of Revenue Committee Chair Lou Ann Linehan and Governor Pillen, with passage of proposals committing about $1 billion in property tax relief. However, more property tax relief is needed to address the decades and decades of property tax exemptions granted by previous legislatures, which dramatically narrowed the property tax base on which local governments rely to fund essential services. Most of the exemptions were necessary so our business and ag sectors could compete with the surrounding states. Each exemption was a tax shift to the remaining property taxpayers. However, unlike other states, the Nebraska legislature historically did not reimburse local governments for the revenue lost due to the increasingly narrowed property tax base, resulting in fewer and fewer Nebraskans paying more and more. Except for school districts, the totally inadequate reimbursement to other local governments to offset even some of the lost property tax revenue was repeatedly cut and eliminated in 2011 to meet the legislature's budget-cutting goals at the time. Except for schools, commitments by previous legislatures to replace the lost state aid to municipalities, counties, and other local governments never happened, but the unfunded mandates continue. Recommendations in tax reports commissioned by the legislature in 1988, 2007, and 2013 stated local governments in Nebraska received lower levels of state revenue sharing than local governments in other states in the region or nation. In recent years, under the leadership of Senator Linehan, the legislature has provided significant property tax relief, especially to school districts. However, as Senator Linehan and the governor have stated, more needs to be done. I conclude my remarks by expressing the League's appreciation for the ongoing dedication of the Revenue Committee and the governor's overall objective to now commit another $1 billion from state sources of revenue to provide more property tax relief. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Association of County Officials. I want to talk about the results of this poll and what it means. The assignment through the Governor's Valuation Reform Working Group over the summer was to provide dollar-for-dollar property tax relief, and you've heard what the governor has said about that. I won't deign to speak for him. Currently, how we account for property tax relief in this state, we have a pass-through credit, which appears at the end of the property tax statement. We have a refundable income tax credit that people have to apply for as part of their income tax return. And just by adjusting how we account for those credits would actually help improve Nebraska's ranking. But there's always been that added component of we really want to make a difference, or the governor really wants to make a difference as far as the property taxes levied and or collected in the state. And so a lot of pushback has been given about increasing sales taxes. And I need to reiterate that NACO is agnostic about how additional relief is funded. However, when you look at it, there are limited avenues that we have available to us. But understanding where the governor wants to go, we thought it would be prudent for us to commission a poll to find out where exactly the Nebraskans want us to take this. And so if you look at page 12 of what we handed out to y'all, you'll see that Nebraskans, if you're looking at a 1% increase in the sales tax, which is what we were looking at, 65% of Nebraskans either strongly favor or favor that. And if it's just a 0.5% increase in the state sales tax, 69% either strongly support or support. So I think those are important things to look at as far as what Nebraskans' appetite for property tax relief is when shifting to a different funding source. So you'll notice, and after page 12, there's a breakdown by demographics, party affiliation, and whatnot. If you go to page 17, you'll see that a majority of Nebraskans strongly support increasing taxes on skill games and cigarettes to provide property tax relief and maintain services. So you'll see that skill games, 84% of Nebraskans either strongly support or support additional tax on that. Cigarette tax, 74% of Nebraskans either strongly support or support. And for candy and soda, 61% of Nebraskans either strongly support or support. I think these are important to note exactly where Nebraskans are on how we are going to fund local and state government at the same time. And so with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Lynn Rex at the League of Municipalities.
Thank you, John. I'm Lynn Rex, Executive Director of the League of Nebraska Municipalities. Thank you for taking time to come today. The League and NACO commissioned this poll to provide some oversight and also some information. The League and NACO strongly support the overall objective of the governor to provide additional property tax relief using state sources of revenue. But as every speaker has said this morning, we do not weigh in on how the legislature or the governor would decide which sources of revenue should be used. I'd like to refer you to the pages talking about the caps. And one of the things you might note is that we did test that, and it is on the page that says most voters oppose a proposal to cap property taxes, including over 1/3 who strongly oppose it. So basically 69% of Nebraskans, when asked, should there be a cap on local government spending, 69% basically said no. What they basically said is 36% strongly opposed it, the others just opposed it. What's also important to note is that 80% of Nebraskans basically said, when given the choice of do you basically side with the group that says, let's have flexibility for local governments on how they spend and fund essential services, or do you side with those folks that say there needs to be a cap to make sure that there's not property tax increases? And 80% indicated, as noted in this poll, 80% said we want flexibility for local governments. That is very consistent with the first two questions asked in this poll. The League has conducted polls for decades, off and on. And each and every time, the answer comes back pretty much the same way, which is, in this case, 75% of Nebraskans trust local government decision-making over state government decision-making, and also make sure that we have the kinds of funds necessary for critical and essential services like public safety, infrastructure needs, libraries, and basically dealing with emergencies. So in closing, we just wanted to underscore that this poll was commissioned so that there would be a clean poll, if you will, not one that's a push poll. These questions were straight out. There was no other information provided to them. We just wanted to know what Nebraskans thought. And we think, again, as was said with the League and NACO, we strongly support the governor's overall initiative to provide more property tax relief. That being said, we do not weigh in on how the legislature does that or which sources of state revenue they select. I also just wanted to give a shout out to Senator Luann Linehan for the extraordinary leadership she's given for years and the significant property tax relief that the legislature has already provided. And in particular, last year, over $1 billion of additional property tax relief. What the governor's looking for here, or what we want to have, is an additional $1 billion on top of that so that we can reduce and have a 40% reduction in property tax asking. With that, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Andrew and John, if you want to come up. If you repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you prevent what happened with the schools where 75% of the school boards exceeded the limits they had on their cap? Lynn and I have been in deep discussion with the governor's team about what a cap would look like, what the reasonable exceptions to the cap would look like. All I can say, Fred, to answer your question is that if you look at the learned experience from what cities and counties do, how they budget their monies, how they spend the taxpayers' dollars, I would just say that our experience has been that our folks are very conservative. They're the ones that are paying property taxes as well as sales taxes in their communities. I think I can't speak for the schools. I can speak for our folks. I find our folks to be responsible.
So I really think it's important, too, to differentiate, Fred, that the school districts have a totally different lid. All other political subdivisions are under a lid in Chapter 13, Article 5. That current lid is a lid on restricted funds. We're currently, and that's been in effect since 1996, when the legislature passed LB 299, which is supposed to go away in 1998. It didn't, it stayed on, but the levy limits took effect. So we already have two caps already. The late unrestricted funds of no more than 2.5% over the prior year, plus allowable growth above 2.5%. Parenthesis, almost nobody gets that because we don't have growth above 2.5%, plus 1% on a supermajority vote. What's important to note is we also have levy caps. There's a constitutional levy cap for counties of 50 cents per $100 of valuation. Municipalities have 45 cents plus 5 for interlocal agreements. That being said, the cap that we've been negotiating for months now with the governor's office is not a cap that would be like the late unrestricted funds. It is a cap on property taxes. Sorry, Andrew, I didn't mean to knock that off. So it is a cap on property taxes. As you know, the governor's talked about a 0% cap. For us, we just can't make that work. We're negotiating, trying to get to a 3% cap on property tax asking over the prior year, or CPI, which is ever greater. But in addition, we need to have those types of exceptions that we currently have in order to operate. And not that everyone's going to use all the exceptions at one time, but exceptions, for example, for bond and debt. And as John and I know from our negotiations, municipalities and counties have a very, very low number when it comes to how bonds have been issued. But you have to have bonds. And by the way, contrary to what has been stated by some, municipalities, counties, no political subdivision or the state can issue bonds for operational expenses. It's for infrastructure. It's for vital equipment. It is not for operations. So in essence, we're working hard to negotiate with the governor's office to get to 3% or CPI, which is ever greater. Again, we need exceptions for bond and debt, allowable growth, which the governor said he's all about allowable growth, which we appreciate, monies for emergencies, and interlocal agreements. So we do have some very important things that we need to accomplish, and we appreciate the patience of the governor's office in working with us, and we'll continue the negotiations actually right after this press conference.
And I would like to add something.
Sorry.
Just to give you the perspective of a locally elected county official as a county commissioner, I campaigned for re-election last year, and I knocked over 1,000 doors in my district. And I can tell you that my constituents do not want to see these essential services cut. These essential services that are provided by local government are essential, and our citizens value those services very highly. I think John hit it well. The county boards across Nebraska, they are responsible, and we are prudent managers of our taxpayers' money. We too also are taxpayers. So we're looking at this from the perspective of us maintaining these services, which are very important to our citizens. And we look forward to working with Governor Pillen, his staff, and primarily the Revenue Committee here of the legislature to find the acceptable solutions where we can actually accomplish tax reform and yet maintain those essential services to our citizens.
Thanks, Mark. Andrew.
Given this history of where we raise taxes to lower property taxes, and all it's done is just within a few years fill back in, property taxes are higher, and have gone up. How do you guarantee that if you raise taxes or you raise revenue, that is actually going to hold property taxes down? They're not going to increase without a
Good question, Andrew. And if you don't mind, I'll take a swing of that real quick. What's I think is worthwhile to know, and I apologize. I love getting into math, and even though I'm not very good at it, but when you look at the math, we've got about $5 billion total statewide that were levied in property taxes. If you don't have a cap or you do have a cap, if you have a 3% cap on $5 billion, that's $150 million that's allowed to grow every year, right? If you do something different, though, and you buy that levy down so that your starting point's at $3 billion, then all of a sudden that's $90 million a year at a max, and that actually makes a difference. And it grows slower, so that, is it a guarantee? There are no guarantees in life, but, I mean, you find a way of holding the levy down at a lower level so that it's not allowed to grow as much into the future.
And one of the things, too, that we pointed out at various hearings, and John pointed this out at a recent hearing at the Revenue Committee, which is We always talk about the expenses of local governments. And of course, these folks that have served for decades in local government are also taxpayers. But what sometimes is not talked about is that the private sector doesn't lower their expenses. So when you have healthcare costs coming in at 22% higher, concrete coming in at extraordinary amounts that you need for streets, roads, and highways, our expenses increase. It was recently pointed out to us that an ambulance and a fire truck, I'm going to say the fire truck, this is at a recent hearing on 12/16 last week, that basically a fire truck was costing $900,000. That same fire truck is projected to be $1.5 million. So the costs increase. That's why we need to have a modest cap, a cap of 3% or CPI, which is ever higher. Municipalities have been extremely responsible, so have counties. And again, we're all under a different cap than school districts, so we can't speak for school districts. But I think this poll underscores the fact that folks appreciate, just like Mark said, and like Board President Van Meter has noted, our citizens appreciate the investment that local governments have made in infrastructure, public safety, libraries, recreation centers, and of course, emergency services.
Yeah, question.
If it was a 0% cap,
Yeah, that's a great question. So already at the county level, I'll give you a good example. This last year, we did not purchase any new road graders. A new road grader is about $450,000. So we deferred that in an effort to keep our tax levy at a decent level. You can only do that for so long, though, because then you end up with a fleet that's really old, and you don't want to be in that position either. So you need to maintain renewing your fleet at a reasonable level every year. A new ambulance in our county, we just purchased a new ambulance last year. A new ambulance is almost $250,000. We got an ambulance that was actually a year older. It was still new, but we were able to save Jefferson County taxpayers about almost $100,000 by purchasing that ambulance instead of a brand new one. So we try to, at the local level, make decisions, prudent decisions. We're taxpayers also, but yet we need, as Lynn alluded to, we need the services, we need the equipment to maintain those services. And as Lynn very ably discussed, the price of all these things has been going up. In Jefferson County, we're just in the process of renewing our new roads contract, and the cost of our labor is going up about 20%. We just did a new law enforcement contract last year. That's going up about 30%. And we do all of these discussions after we do a salary survey. So we survey other counties that are similar size to us. We're also in competition with the private sector. And so we understand what the market is. And if you don't maintain a competitive position, what happens, you end up losing those people. The worst thing for us to happen would be losing a trained paramedic, losing a trained road grader operator, losing a trained law enforcement officer. Those are just some examples. So we have to remain competitive or we lose those people. Where we are, we're not in direct competition with the city of Lincoln. Some of my fellow county commissioners in counties right around Lincoln, they are in direct competition with the larger cities like Gage, Seward, Saline. So they have the competition with Lincoln also, but we're a little bit further out, so we don't have that. But it's the same principle. You're in competition both with other public sector and with other private sector entities, and you have to remain competitive while still trying to keep your levy down. So every year, it's a real balancing act. And so the discussion that we're having with Governor Pillen, with his staff, with the Revenue Committee, it's a very healthy discussion because I think it's helping our elected officials here at the state level understand that, what we are faced with at the local level to maintain those essential services. Yeah. Yeah. So last year, in Jefferson County, our valuation actually increased a little bit, not a great deal amount. We were able to maintain the levy. We either kept the levy the same or we dropped it a little bit. Our actual tax went up about 3%. The tax asking went up about 3%. But I would give you the percentages, for some of those other things, how they're going up so much. So we have deferred some things just because we didn't want to increase our levy anymore. But at some point, you have to come back and you have to address those things. I think Lynn hit it very well. We are in competition with everybody else in the economy. And we all know what the price of everything is doing, whether it's parts, fuel, equipment, personnel, insurance packages for our personnel. We all know what those costs are doing. So we're trying really hard to responsibly manage those things and yet, be fair to our taxpayers. So, thank you.
I'd just like to add to that. As far as the municipalities, we deal with the same and similar things that Mark has just indicated. I live in a rather smaller community of just under 2,000, and we're located between Kearney and Grand Island. And so we deal with whether it's labor, whether it's the other cost. We contract with Buffalo County for our law enforcement, and that tends to increase about 4% every year. If we were to have to live under a hard cap, we would need to reduce our workforce, which is very slim right now, and the quality of life type of issues that we have and the things that our citizens expect within our community, we would no longer be able to maintain those.
One thought that just came to mind. In January, Nebraska experienced a very rare event with a number of back-to-back snowstorms. And in our county, as in many counties across Nebraska, it was essential that we got out and we cleared roads and people could get to their livestock. We had a couple instances where we had to actually take the plow out in the middle of the night so the ambulance could get out. And I know in one case we probably saved the person's life. So these are critical services to our citizens. I'm very grateful. We in our county had made the decision to keep 3 of our road grader, our plow operators in the county shop at night. So in case there was an emergency, we could get out and get those roads cleared. And we're talking 10 to 12 foot snow drifts. It's not the same as if you live in Lincoln, you're not going to see a 10 or 12 foot snow drift, but you're going to see that out on a rural county road in Nebraska. And I know we're not unique in that. There are a lot of instances like that where we were able to go out, we made a difference in people's lives. And I know in one case in our county, we probably saved the person's life that night because we took the plow out, we cleared the road, the ambulance was able to get to him, and they were able to get him up here to Lincoln and save their life. So when we say these are essential services, that's not sugarcoating it. They are essential services to our citizens.
I have 2 other points I just wanted to point out. One deals with the question, Andrew, that you had, dealing with just the cap itself. So let's talk about the cap that we're negotiating. It doesn't matter what the valuation, if it increases or decreases under this type of cap that we're negotiating with the governor's office. Your starting point, for example, would be in Gibbon, Nebraska, what their tax asking was for FY 22-23. You start at that. It doesn't matter what the valuation is. The governor uses the term rebasing. That's what he references. Doesn't matter what the valuation is. That's your starting point. And then basically it's a little bit complicated, but you back out some exceptions. Then it would be no more than 3% or CPI, which is ever greater. To be clear, the governor's not at 3%. We want 3% because we can't live with 0% or 1% or even 2%. So bottom line is then you add in those exceptions and then put in the property tax relief. This would be phenomenal because as everybody knows here, if you've been around the track for any period of time, our legislature, has never reimbursed local governments for the tax-based loss. That's what Mayor Van Meter was talking about. Decades and decades of sales tax exemptions and programs, reducing the property tax base dramatically without providing reimbursements to local government of any magnitude whatsoever. In fact, the little amount they provided, they then repealed in 2011 with passage of LB 383. So what does that mean? That's why when you look at the 3 studies, there were actually 4, but the last 3 studies commissioned by the Nebraska legislature, all 3 of them reference that local governments in Nebraska, as Mayor Van Meter noted, receive less state revenue than other local governments, not only in the Midwest, but throughout the nation. So there an exception to that would be on the school district side. So in any event, we just wanted to point that out and also emphasize, because we've heard from a number of folks opposing the governor's proposal, that bottom line is, oh my gosh, this could be a tax shift. Well, hello, every tax shift has happened. Every exemption in the past 40 years has been a tax shift. Every time there's a new program that takes away a tax base, it's a tax shift. So it's a tax shift when you take it away. It's probably going to be a tax shift, but that's the whole point. The whole point here is to make sure that we balance and try to get a better balance with sales tax, income tax, and property tax. So again, we appreciate you coming today. And John, any closing thoughts?
Lynn expresses any thoughts I might have way better than I could. So.
LR 287CA, John drafted it, and I'll let him talk to that. Board President Van Meter will be there testifying in support of it today on behalf of Gibbon, the City of Lincoln, the City of Omaha. We strongly support that because, again, we stand alone as a state that has not reimbursed local governments. And kudos to Senator Linehan for the significant property tax relief that she has brought forward over a period of years, and certainly Governor Pillen and Senator Linehan providing the leadership to provide $1 billion last year. John drafted 287.
Well, so LR 287CA, it's kind of a companion piece to LR 1CA that Senator Blood had put in last year. LR 1CA, and I'll mix both of them, but LR 1CA, that requires the state to fund unfunded mandates. If they say, counties, cities, you have a new duty that we're going to give you, the state has to fund it. On LR 287CA, that's on the opposite side, on the revenue side, where if the state says, we're going to eliminate a funding source for you, they have to replace it. Whether it's, and in my opinion, it should be either through some sort of legislation that allows us to generate that revenue or through a direct cash transfer. One, we want to make sure we take care of the services side on LR1CA, but we also want to make sure we take care of the funding side on LR287CA. And so, like Lynn said, I may have had a hand in drafting it, so I think it's a terrific piece of legislation. Probably not.
Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.